I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The cafe smelled like old espresso and paper. The corner table by the window, where I always ended up, was still scratched with doodles from someone else. I shuffled my laptop bag, trying to untangle the strap, and when I looked up, there she was. Mid-40s, hair a little streaked with silver I hadn't noticed before, a cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender. She smiled at me like she knew me, but not in that teasing way you expect from someone trying too hard. It was careful, measured, like she was testing the waters. "Cappuccino, right?" she said, her voice the kind that could startle you awake without yelling. I mumbled, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, pretending not to notice that she had remembered my usual order from months ago. "Thanks." She nodded, folding her hands over the counter, eyes flicking to mine for a fraction longer than necessary. I noticed the slight tremble in her fingers, or maybe it was mine. I've been coming to this cafe most mornings for a few weeks now, sitting in the same spot, letting the world pass by. Nobody knew my name, nobody asked. That's how I liked it. Quiet routines, unsent texts lingering in my drafts, half-finished thoughts paused in the middle of sentences. Loneliness didn't announce itself here. It just settled in the small silences, the cold rim of a mug, the tapping of keys. "Do you still, remember history exams?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I froze for a second, unsure if she meant my high school years or some private memory we weren't supposed to revisit. Then I laughed, half embarrassed, half startled. "Yeah, somehow. You always read too fast," she said, a small crease forming near her eyes. "I always thought you'd miss something important if you skimmed." I smiled without thinking, noticing how her gaze lingered just a beat too long, like she wanted me to feel seen, but carefully, like she was afraid to touch anything. I looked down at my coffee, folded the napkin in my hands once, twice, letting the creases line up neatly, as if that could keep me grounded. There was a pause, filled with the soft hiss of the espresso machine. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words scattered like ashes in my mouth. Instead, I studied her hands, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and something quietly hollow opened inside me. "You know," she said, leaning slightly on the counter, "some things are better forgotten." I blinked. It wasn't a warning or a scold, just a statement that floated between us. I didn't know if it included me, or if it was meant for herself. Maybe both. I wanted to ask her to explain, to pull the thread of this strange nostalgia and unravel it, but I only nodded, a small, hesitant tilt of the head. She smiled again, this time just a flicker, and then she turned away to serve another customer. I lingered by my table, heart slowing and speeding in the same beat, staring at the door she had walked through and wondering if she'd come back. My thumb hovered over my phone, tempted to send a message I didn't know how to start. A draft. A pause. A sentence left hanging. And then, just as I was about to shut the laptop and leave, my phone buzzed. A single message. "See you tomorrow." I froze. The next morning, I arrived early, more out of habit than expectation. The cafe was nearly empty. Sunlight slanted across the worn wooden tables in a way that made dust motes hang like tiny stars. She was there, wiping down the counter, hair pulled back in a loose bun that seemed effortless, though I suspected it wasn't. "Morning," I said, a little too quickly, juggling my bag in the door. "Morning," she replied, voice softer this time. She handed me my cappuccino without waiting for the order, just like yesterday, and I felt the strange comfort of being anticipated. I took the seat across from her, while she perched on the edge of the counter, fidgeting with a sugar packet. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, almost under her breath. "Miss what?" I asked, unsure if I should prod. "The classroom, the chaos, the exams, the kids," she said, tracing a line on the counter with her finger. There was a hesitance there, like the words themselves were risky, delicate. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, sometimes I think about those afternoons, sneaking snacks, waiting for the bell. Not the tests, just the quiet moments." She smiled faintly, eyes dropping to the cappuccino in front of her. "I suppose it's easier to remember the small things than the mistakes." We fell into silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty but heavy with things neither of us said. My fingers tapped lightly against the ceramic mug. I imagined scenarios I wasn't supposed to, sitting closer, touching her hand, hearing her laugh at something private. My chest tightened, a quiet mix of longing and guilt. Her eyes flicked up to mine, catching me in the middle of a daydream. "You look tired," she said, and there was no judgment, only noticing. "I didn't sleep well," I admitted. A pause. I want to tell her about the half-finished text I'd never sent her, about the nights I traced back memories of her voice. But I didn't. Instead, she leaned over slightly, offering me a sugar packet with a small, crooked smile. My fingers brushed hers for just a moment, light, accidental, yet lingered far too long in my chest. I pulled my hand back, pretending to adjust my sleeve. She chuckled softly, a sound that didn't fill the room but seemed to settle into its corners. "I never expected to see you again," she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't answer. The words I wanted to say, "I've been waiting," caught somewhere behind my teeth. I focused on folding the napkin on the table, watching the creases align, counting the quiet moments between us. Finally, she stood, brushing off her hands. "I have to restock the pastries," she said, but her eyes stayed on me a beat longer than necessary, holding the weight of something unsaid. I felt it, the risk, the age difference, the history between us, the impossible threads tugging at reality. When she finally moved away, she turned her head just slightly, enough for her gaze to meet mine again. Her smile was fleeting, teasing, quiet, and in it I sensed a permission I wasn't sure I deserved. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I saw her before she noticed me. The cafe smelled of rain on pavement, the windows misted, and she was tucking her coat around her shoulders like she didn't want anyone to see the way she shivered. "Hey," I said, voice softer than usual. She looked up, startled, blinked, then smiled, small, measured, like she was choosing not to let anything slip. "Morning," she said. Her hands lingered on the counter, fingers brushing the edge as if she might cling to it for balance. I slid in my usual seat. My coffee had gone cold in the walkover, but I didn't care. My eyes found her hands, the way she flexed her fingers, the tiny twitch in her wrist when she rested her chin there. I didn't see you yesterday," I said, the words stumbling out. "Yeah." She glanced away, watching a car crawl past the window. Her lips pressed together, and I realized she wasn't going to say more. Not now. There was a pause, heavy with the sound of spoons clinking and the hiss of the espresso machine. I wanted to reach across, to touch her hand, to ask her if she really meant what she said about forgetting, but I didn't. Instead, I traced the rim of my cup with my thumb, letting the thoughts simmer. A laugh came from the other side of the room, my friend, Mikey, waving at me. I froze, and she shifted slightly, a subtle tightening of her shoulders, eyes darting toward the door. I swallowed. The spell broke. My hand twitched on the table, my stomach fluttering. "I should go check on some things," she said, and I wanted to argue, to pull her back, but the words stuck in my throat. She picked up a small tray, moving carefully, every step deliberate. I watched, helpless, as she walked past my table, the scent of her perfume lingering faintly, almost unbearably. My chest tightened. When she returned, there was a bag of croissants balanced in her hand, and she set it down with care. Our fingers brushed for just a second, and I felt a jolt, something unspoken hanging between us, dangerous and immediate. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, half smiling, eyes lowering. There was something in the tilt of her head, the quiet hesitation, that spoke louder than anything she could say. I opened my mouth, but the words faltered. "Do you want this too? Am I crossing a line I shouldn't?" We lingered there, breaths caught in the same rhythm. The quiet threat of a confession pressed between us. I leaned just a little closer, and she tilted her chin upward, almost closing the distance. The bell above the door jingled, and someone walked in. She snapped her gaze forward, and I drew back, chest tight, heart hammering. I wanted to tell her, wanted to say I've been thinking about you, but the sentence vanished into the hum of the cafe. Instead, I just watched, frozen, as she poured herself a cup of tea. Fingers trembling slightly, lips pressed in that familiar, fleeting smile. And I realized the pull between us wasn't gentle. It was quiet, slow, and already impossible. We didn't speak of it, didn't need to. The nearly touch, the almost confession, lingered in the silence. The park was nearly empty, early evening settling in with a chill that made the lamplight hum against the damp pavement. I walked beside her, though a few steps behind felt safer, or maybe that was just my way of holding back. She was quiet, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her coat, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the trees. I noticed the way her shoulders were tight, how she kept twisting a silver ring around her finger. Something had changed. "You haven't been coming by," she said, without looking at me. I hesitated. I thought maybe you wanted some space." Her lips pressed together. A small shake of the head. "I'm not sure what I want," she admitted, voice almost a whisper. The confession was out there, fragile, trembling in the cold. We stopped at a bench. She perched at the edge, hands clasped tightly, and I sat a careful distance away. The silence felt thick, almost suffocating, filled with all the things neither of us could say. "I saw him today," she said finally, eyes lowering. "Mikey." He noticed, I think. My chest tightened. A familiar mix of guilt and jealousy flared. Sharp, quiet, unbearable. I wanted to protest, to tell her it didn't matter, that none of it mattered, but my words stuck. "I shouldn't be thinking about this," she continued. "You're 20-something, and I'm—" Her voice broke, and she didn't finish the sentence. I swallowed. The air between us vibrated with the almost things, the half-spoken truths. I wanted to tell her that I'd been thinking about her every morning, every pause between messages, every coffee I sipped alone, that she had somehow seeped into my quiet routines. But the words dissolved into the evening air. I shifted on the bench, fingers tracing the edge of my coat. I stopped. My throat felt too tight. Her gaze met mine for just a fraction of a second. Then she looked away. The pause was a tether pulling both of us closer and keeping us apart at the same time. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything," she murmured, almost to herself. Her confession, or near confession, hovered between us. I leaned slightly forward, the urge to reach out strong, reckless, dangerous. And yet I stayed put. My thumb brushed against the sleeve of my coat, a nervous tick, a quiet anchor. She shifted again, shoulders rising, lowering, as if she could shake away the weight of the tension in one motion. My heart thumped in a way I hadn't expected, a slow burn of want and fear tangled together. "I don't know if I can," she said, voice barely audible. Paused. Then, after a beat, "Handle it." I stayed silent, because anything I said might tip the fragile balance. The lamp flickered above us. Leaves rustled on the wet pavement. And I realized that for the first time, she had opened a door I wasn't sure I was allowed to cross, or wanted to. I didn't ask the question, didn't speak the words, but it hung in the air anyway. Do we risk it? I went by the cafe that morning, expecting her. Half expecting, really, because that's how these things had settled into my routine. The quiet hope that she might be there, the familiar pull of her presence, even before she spoke. She wasn't. The barista shrugged when I asked. "She's not coming in this week," he said, eyes flicking toward the corner she usually occupied. I sat anyway, letting the chair opposite mine remain empty. The cappuccino steamed faintly in front of me, untouched. My fingers traced the rim of the mug, mind wandering to every almost touch, every near confession we had shared. I didn't expect her to walk in. Not yet. When she finally appeared, not in the cafe, but on the street outside, talking quietly to someone, my stomach dropped. She was laughing, tilting her head at a man I didn't recognize. Someone older. Calm. Comfortable. She glanced around for a moment, as if she might have noticed me, and then the corner of her mouth curved in a polite smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I froze. The ache wasn't jealousy exactly, not the fiery kind you imagine. It was quieter, more confusing. The realization that there were layers of her life I'd never touch, moments and people I wasn't meant to share. My chest felt hollowed, yet oddly full, heavy with both longing and something I couldn't name. I imagined her turning toward me, stepping closer, maybe letting a hand brush against mine. But she didn't. She walked past, and I watched her silhouette blur in the morning haze, shoulders relaxed, her laugh still echoing faintly, as if it belonged somewhere I would never be. Back in the cafe, I stared at my cup. My thumb hovered over my phone. A message formed, simple, meaningless, yet monumental. I saw you. Everything okay? I didn't send it. Instead, I left the screen dark, watched the sunlight shift across the table. The empty chair mocked me, silent, patient, impossible. I folded the napkin once, twice, the creases lining up neatly as if the world might obey my quiet gestures. And I realized something. The tension between us hadn't vanished. It was still there, just postponed, waiting. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I imagined her smile again, remembered the small tremble in her fingers when our hands brushed, and it hurt more than anything she had actually said. Hope and doubt tangled, sharp and soft at the same time. The cafe filled slowly, the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine wrapping around me. I sipped the cappuccino, cold now, and let my gaze drift to the empty chair once more. The door jingled. I glanced up, half expecting her, but it was only the barista with a fresh tray of pastries. I didn't move. The rain had just stopped when I saw her standing on the steps outside her apartment. Damp hair clung to her forehead, coat buttoned loosely. I hesitated, umbrella in hand, unsure if I was stepping into something fragile or into my own undoing. She didn't move when I reached the bottom of the stairs. Just watched me, eyes steady but unreadable. I felt the weight of weeks of half moments, near confessions, and unanswered messages pressed down on my chest. I didn't come by. I said finally, words careful, clipped. She shifted, brushing a wet strand behind her ear. I know, she replied. The pause stretched long, almost unbearable. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd traced her laughter in my memory, that her absent smiles had left the chair across from mine empty every morning, that I'd pictured this moment, standing here, and it scared me more than I expected. But I stopped. Words felt clumsy, too loud. Instead, I took a step closer. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. The distance between us seemed measured, but for the first time, I thought it could shrink without breaking. I'm sorry, I said, voice low, for the waiting, for the not knowing. Her lips pressed together, a subtle nod. I'm sorry, too, for the pull, for everything. She looked down at her shoes, then back up, eyes catching mine. It was quiet. Nothing in the world needed to be said beyond the pause, beyond the breathing we shared in the wet air. I noticed the slight tremble in her fingers, the way her coat hung heavy on her shoulders. She was holding herself together, and so was I. I didn't mean to. I started, then stopped. Half the confession stayed inside, lodged somewhere between courage and fear. She reached out first, brushing my sleeve with the back of her hand, fleeting, deliberate. That small touch carried everything: recognition, caution, longing. I didn't pull away. I let the warmth linger. Okay, she said softly, a single word, and it felt like the entire sentence neither of us could manage. I nodded. My heart wasn't calm, but there was relief. Connection. A fragile agreement that we were here, now, even if only for a moment. The rain puddled at our feet, the streetlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. I wanted to stay forever in the hesitation between words, in the tremble of a hand, in the quiet acknowledgement that nothing else needed to happen yet. We didn't speak again. Didn't need to. I watched her smile, a small, careful, honest tilt of the lips, and that was enough. Enough for me to breathe again, enough to leave the step without rushing. As I pulled my coat tighter, I realized the cost of what had passed between us. Every risk, every pause, every suppressed thought. It had been worth it, even if fleeting. I didn't ask her to step closer. She didn't ask me to stay. And maybe that made it perfect. Just the two of us, standing in the quiet aftermath. And a simple human connection. A touch, a nod, a soft okay. Absolutely. Let's close this story. White heavy checkmark weeks passed. The cafe smelled the same, the chairs still scratched, the sunlight still slanting the same way. I came by on habit more than hope. Some mornings, she wasn't there. Some mornings, she was just enough to make me pause, just enough to feel the tug of everything we hadn't said. I stopped waiting for perfect moments. I stopped imagining confessions and near misses. Instead, I noticed small things. The way her coat hung on a chair, the quiet bend of her fingers when she poured coffee, the faint scent of her perfume lingering after she'd left. One evening, I found myself walking past her building. The street was empty, except for a cat slinking between parked cars. The door to her apartment opened, and she stepped out with a bag of groceries. I hesitated, umbrella dripping, and she glanced at me. Just a glance. Not a smile, not an invitation. But it was enough to feel seen. "You're home late," I said, voice casual, though my chest tightened. She shrugged, holding the bag against her. Yeah, the market was crowded. I wanted to ask her in, wanted to trace the rhythm of her evening, wanted to stay in the quiet bubble we had once almost touched. But I didn't. I realized that the pull between us wasn't a door to walk through. It was a shadow I carried with me. Something intimate, dangerous, and beautifully impossible. We stood there for a moment, the street light haloing the drizzle. I shifted my weight, hands in pockets, watching her. She watched me, eyes careful, holding herself together. And in that pause, I understood everything we'd been. Longing, restraint, small confessions, almost touches. "I should go," she said finally. Not a goodbye, just a note of reality, of life continuing. I nodded, a small tilt of the head, folding the weight of all that had passed into one gesture. No words, no promises, just acknowledgement. She turned, walked inside, leaving the door ajar for a moment. I stayed still, feeling the quiet pull of absence, the warmth of memory. I didn't feel loss exactly, nor closure. I felt moved, changed. I walked on, umbrella tapping the pavement, and looked back once. The light from her window spilled onto the street like a faint halo. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't knock. I didn't expect another moment. And yet, somehow, the story felt complete. The memory lingered, fragile and alive, like a sentence left unfinished but still understood. Some things, she had said, are better remembered. And I did.